All right, welcome to another exciting writing lesson with Mr. Lassard. I'm going to try to do this one quickly because I know that 15 minutes is probably about as much time as you want to spend with this. We're going to talk briefly today about next steps with CEEC paragraphs. So I introduced you to CEEC in the previous slideshow. I've seen a little bit of your work, and based on what I've seen, this is what I think, or these things are what I think are what we need to work on to improve those paragraphs. Just a reminder, these notes are required, so I will be checking for them. I'm sure that you know that at this point. We've got a little cartoon here, Snoopy on the left. Snoopy is saying, good writing is hard work, and as much as it's supposed to be cute and funny, there's a lot of truth in that. So I don't want anybody to feel as though, even though maybe we struggled with the first one and tried really hard and maybe we didn't get exactly where we wanted to be, just remember that writing is a process, and a lot of times a frustrating process, and it's all right to need a little bit more work on it. So our objectives today are for you to be able to build upon your concept of your understanding of CEEC. You've got a basis for that. Now we're going to build a little bit more into it. Second, you should be thinking about planning your next steps for your expository paragraphs based on the advice that I'm going to give you for each step of CEEC. So I've got 4 pieces of advice here, one for each. One for the claim, one for the evidence, one for the elaboration, and one for the conclusion. And you should look at these pieces of advice and think which ones apply to your own writing. So piece of advice number 1 is that we need to fine-tune our claims. I noticed a lot of broadness in claims, and that's really what I'm going to say here is the biggest issue. So the biggest problem that I found was that some people had claims that were just way too big. They were too broad. And the problem arises then that there's no room or there's no direction for expansion. There's so much that can be covered that you just have nowhere to go with it. You just kind of have to stand still. So here's an example of a lot of claims that I saw. It said something like, culture is a big part of everyone's life, and it isn't different for me. To me, my culture is a lot about sports. So we've got this big idea of culture here at the beginning, and we're saying just this kind of broad statement about how culture is important. Well, yeah, okay, but we don't need to say that. We've already got that. We know that. And we end by saying culture is a lot about sports. Well, there's so much to say for so many people about sports. It's, there's so much to say that we have nowhere to go from there almost. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe there's too many places to go, and then it's just, too big. We don't know what we're looking at. So how do we fix this? There's 2 things we can do. One, we need to not meander into the claim. Meandering is like wandering, taking our time to get there. We want to get right into the topic of the paragraph. If the topic of the paragraph isn't culture, it's sports, then let's start off talking about sports, not talking about culture and kind of getting our way in there. The second thing that we can do is clarify what we're going to say or explore about the topic. If we're just going to say that we're going to talk about sports, then there's too much there, right? But if we're going to say something specific about sports, if we have an idea about sports or an idea about the direction that we want this paragraph to go, then that's going to give us some insight as to what to do later in the paragraph. So if you look at this example, it says, sports often define the ideas by which people model their lives, offering insight into their cultural values. A glimpse at my own relationship to sports reveals my ultimate values of teamwork and good sportsmanship. So right off the bat, we start with sports. We know that that's going to be the topic of the paragraph. It's even the first word, although sometimes we can wait a few words. But we know right off the bat we're talking about sports, what their relationship is to culture. But sports are more important than culture here. We also know that we're going to be talking about what sports does for me. They elaborate on the idea of teamwork and good sportsmanship. So it gives us a direction. It gives us something to explore in the paragraph rather than just saying sports are part of culture. right? Which you could write a whole book on and not cover that entire thing. Second piece of advice goes with our evidence. So we want to paint pictures with our evidence. We want to, clarify what's going on with the evidence. Make it unique, make it something that we can see in our brains. So the biggest issue that I saw when reading paragraphs was that some people's evidence was too broad to be specific. Like I could see that there were specifics behind it, but it was there was just it was just too big. Very similar to the claim. It wasn't, I didn't have a clear picture of what this evidence was, and that meant I could have seen it coming from anyone. Like any number of people could have written the evidence that I saw in the paragraphs, and we want it to sound like it comes directly from you in this case, because you are the source of the evidence, and you're our credible source of evidence in this case, since the paper's about you. So here's an example of something that I saw. It says, I have been playing soccer since I was 5 years old, and I still have all my team pictures in my family room at home from preschool through high school. All right, fine. So our evidence is pictures. Great. You've been playing since you were 5, but really, how many people could say this? There's probably tons and tons of people who could say this. I could picture any number of pictures. I don't know what these pictures look like, who's in them. There's nothing really specific to the person who's saying this. So there's a couple things that we can do to fix this issue. One, remember that in this paper we want specific items, objects, memories, and experiences. And just saying that we have a collection of pictures is not a specific item. Pictures also go along with memories and experiences. So we could definitely have given more about that as well. One way that we can do this is we use verbs to our advantage to show the reader rather than tell them what they're describing or what you're describing. If you look at the verbs up here, we've got have been, we've got was, we've got have. If we just go with those three, they're super boring. Have been, was, have, like they don't tell us anything about what's going on, really. What we're looking at. It's just kind of blah. It's very passive. If we look at this example, it says, the roots of my sportsmanship were planted early. Even today, anyone visiting me can find 2 decades of gritty-faced, smiling soccer teams beaming out from rows of official team pictures. From 5-year-olds sporting toothy grins to confident, smirking teenagers, each picture testifies to the strength of the cultivated bonds of brothers on the pitch. So we can see, we start to form this picture of the teams in the pictures, the people in the pictures. We can start to see, they're smiling. Okay, so there's definitely positive experience behind that. And then if we look at the verbs we're using planted. Even today, anyone visiting me. So we're narrating a bit of a story here. Smiling, so that puts a picture in our minds, right? Beaming, sporting, smirking, testifies to the strength of cultivated. All of these kind of strong verbs, positive in the most case, smiling verbs. We get the sense of how happy these people are. What a pleasure it is to kind of be looking at these pictures, and that really helps with our evidence. The third piece of advice that I have for you is to expand the claim with elaboration. This is where a lot of people struggled. If I were to put a number on it, I would say probably 75% of the paragraphs that I read really struggled with the elaboration piece more than anything else. So the biggest issue that I saw was that people neglected to elaborate on their evidence. They hoped that it spoke for itself. And a lot of times this is because those people did not have a specific claim. They didn't have anything to expand upon, so they just kind of left it, or when they got to the elaboration, they didn't know what to say. I did give it some advice in the previous slideshow, which you can look back at. There's a sentence that you could use with some blank spots you fill in. But here's another, I'll give you in a second another idea for how to elaborate. So here's an example of the problem. It says, these pictures show how important sports have been to me for a long time. Well, that's really just kind of restating what that broad claim was. The claim was, oh, well, sports are important to me. And now I'm saying the pictures show that sports are important to me, right? There's nothing new there. That's just kind of like, okay, well, I don't need you to tell me that anymore because I already got it. I already got it. I don't need any more of that. How do we fix this? Well, we clarify, remember how the evidence is broadening the reader's understanding of the claim. And if you have something to say about the claim, if in your claim you're giving yourself something to say about the topic, then you have something to build into your elaboration. So again, this is really hard to do if you start with a weak claim because you have nowhere to go. So remember that it's your job to elaborate on why or how the claim is true. And if you don't have a strong claim, if you don't have something to say in the claim, then there's nowhere to go with this elaboration. So look at this next sentence. Remember, my claim, the specific claim that I gave was that sports help us see sportsmanship and all of that kind of stuff, right? How important sportsmanship is to me. So if we look at this sentence or a couple of sentences, it says, considering these pictures on a cultural level, observers might not only witness dedication to a sport, but the passion for the individuals in the pictures. But observing the decades-long growth of the boys in those photos is not just a glimpse at passion, it's a clear testimony to the strength of the relationships between the individuals and their ability to grow stronger as a team. So I'm building on that idea of teamwork, right? I say, look, they're growing up together, and through growing up together, you see them playing together and growing stronger. You can see the relationships in these pictures, and you can't deny that the relationships and the teamwork in those pictures is really important to these guys, right? So there's somewhere I've built upon the claim rather than just saying, and so sports is important to me. And this is really what we want to do. Piece of advice for the conclusion is that we want to connect to the audience, build a connection to the audience. So the biggest issue was that a lot of the conclusions that I read just repeated what we already knew. And that's boring to readers, So here's an example. It says, clearly soccer shows how important sports are to my culture. Again, just kind of rehashing that same idea. Soccer is important, or sports are important, and I told you about soccer, right? But I already know all that. Not only that, but I read it 2 sentences ago and the previous sentence. I don't want to read it again, right? So how do we fix this? Well, we don't tell the reader what's already obvious to them, because then the reader just gets frustrated, and you as the writer are probably frustrated as well. You want to make the reader feel as though they've grown by reading your ideas. By knowing about you or by knowing about what you've just talked about, the information is relevant to them as well. So if we look at this example, it says, today, I may not play soccer as well or as often as I did when I was younger. So there's a little glimpse into who I am today as well. But the cultural value of sportsmanship and dedication to my teammates remains a steadfast part of who I am. So now I know who I'm dealing with now, today, right? Without sports, I might never have learned this essential cultural strength that makes me a contributing member of society. Oh, this guy's a good guy. Because he's a good because he's a good sport, he contributes to society in a positive way, and I'm part of society, so I'm glad I know this thing about him. So hopefully that's clear. One bonus piece of advice is this. If you look at if I were to put all the parts of the first kind of problem paragraph together, you would see that it's really awfully boring. Whereas if we put the 4 parts of the improved paragraph together, we've still got an acceptable academic voice, but it's more pleasant to read and to listen to. It sounds personal. So here's the whole thing together for the problem paragraphs, problem sentences. It says, culture is a big part of everyone's life, and it isn't different to me. For me. To me, my culture is a lot about sports. I've been playing soccer since I was 5 years old, and I still have all my team pictures in my family room at home, from preschool through high school. These pictures show how important sports have been to me for a long time. Clearly, soccer shows how important sports are to me, are to my culture. It's like, oh, all right, I guess that's fine. I've got nothing, I don't really care about that paragraph. Whereas if we read this one together, I know it's long, we're almost done. It says, sports often define the ideals by which people model their lives, offering insight into their cultural values. A glimpse at my own relationship to sports reveals my ultimate values of teamwork and good sportsmanship. The roots of my sportsmanship were planted early. Even today, anyone visiting me can find 2 decades of gritty-faced, smiling soccer teams beaming out from rows of official team pictures. From 5-year-olds sporting toothy grins to confident, smirking teenagers, each picture testifies to the strength of the cultivated bonds of brothers on the pitch. Considering these pictures on a cultural level, observers might not only witness dedication to a sport, but the passion for the individuals in the pictures. But observing the decades-long growth of the boys in those photos is not just a glimpse at passion. It's a clear testimony to the strength of the relationships between the individuals and their ability to grow stronger as a team. Today, I might not play soccer as well or as often as I did when I was younger, but the cultural value of sportsmanship and dedication to my teammates remains a steadfast part of who I am. Without sports, I might never have learned this essential cultural strength that makes me a contributing member of society. So again, still acceptable in an academic setting, but much more pleasant to read and listen to. It gives me a glimpse of who this person really is and what their culture, at least surrounding sports, is really like. And that's what we want. Have a good evening, and I'll see you tomorrow.